So Arts Ottawa, we are an organization that is driving collective action to address the needs and priorities of Ottawa's arts sector. And we are working on some areas of new strategic focus. So like I said last year, it was about design, putting into place the governance model that we kind of co-created together. And this year is about moving strategically forward together. So we're looking at making Ottawa's arts ecosystem more visible, identifier les enjeux de notre secteur en général, surfacing what we can offer and what we need, and clarify the collective supports that matter most. I need to read, otherwise I will go like. And so this is part of building out our civic infrastructure. So what do we mean by civic infrastructure? It is the conditions that make our cultural work possible. And what we're looking at doing this year is taking all of the priorities that we had heard from, frankly, the past 15, 20 years, but also really sharply the last 2 years, and seeing what are the structural changes, what are the system changes that we need to make to be able to address these. I think this is something that we hear a lot about, particularly, I can change my thing, there we go. So these are our 3 infrastructure lenses that we're working on in the next few years. So we're focusing on physical, social, and economic today. So physical infrastructure, for example, we hear a lot from artists and arts organizations that they don't have accessible and affordable space in the city. But equally, we hear that there's lots of commercial vacancies. We hear there's lots of office vacancies. There is underused spaces across the city. And so what is the barrier holding these 2 realities apart? We have a really ambitious downtown revitalization action plan that's talking about how do we, have arts-led downtown revitalization. But where are the groups in our community that are ready to take that leadership through, access to space in our downtown and across our city? So we're working on some pieces. Shared Ground is one initiative that we're focusing on around physical infrastructure. The social impact, I think we all know the deep and important impact on our society, on our sense of belonging that the arts have every day. But are we storytelling that in a big way? How are we holding that knowledge? How are we holding these data sets? So my colleague Alex has been leading with a number of amazing community members, a social impact evaluation action lab that's looking to address some of these pieces. And then we come to our 3rd pillar, economic infrastructure, which is why we're gathered here today. And so we're looking at what is the effective coordination that we can have around strengthening our economic development. Alex and I went to, and our speakers today were there as well, a session in the fall that Carleton University was hosting around net zero and community wealth building. And it's really around like climate and energy, and they asked for an arts voice, and Alex and I didn't know what to expect, but we went. And as they explained out what community wealth building is, we thought, oh, that's the thing that we're missing, the shared language, the organized systems that help us address all of the really big structural changes that feel like precarity, that feel like not resilience in our sector, right? We talk a lot about artist wages and the kind of quality of the jobs in our sector. We talk a lot about access to space, and land use, about our ability to make decision-making. A lot of things that we know experience and that we heard as our sector priorities seem so neatly organized in strategies under community wealth programs. So we thought maybe this is a way for us to build some shared language and coordination for the sector that allows us to insert different places. And I'm going to hand off to Leah before I get too far. So Leah I'll introduce Leah, she'll get into the series. But wanted to also come up on April 23rd, we'll be hosting a member forum that will be really focusing in on what are our sector priorities heading up into the next municipal election, which is this fall. And also what are our, I don't have a friendlier word for it, what are our demands for the next council? Like what do we want from an arts and culture community in our next council? And so that will be on April 23rd. And I think there are some things coming up in the city right now and at the province that this community level building framework will really help us attach to, particularly the things around community benefits agreements, around the new culture plan, around some of the economic development programs. So I think we're going to see some really strong alignment, and we'll be able to put in practice what we're learning today into some real strategies for change in the future.
That was such a great introduction, and I think sets us up well with what our intention is for this series, which really is shared learning. And it's a genuine exploration, because it could happen that community wealth building isn't the framework that makes sense or the language that makes sense for us. So the series is really set up for us to assess whether it works for us. And if it does, how can we then merge our understanding of it, our definition of it, into what other leaders in the space are using it for, and therefore, as Cassandra said, show up at the table with this shared vocabulary and understanding of where we fit within the broader community wealth building conversation. So the series is going to happen over the next several months. Today is our launch. And we're so thrilled that we have an expert from Scotland zooming in to give us sort of the lay of the land. But we hope that you'll join us for the other sessions, because as Sarah's going to lay out for you, the framework has 5 pillars in it. And so we've dedicated a session after today for each of those pillars. And we're bringing in guest speakers to speak specifically on that pillar and the work that they're doing or the tool that they're using to activate that pillar. So for today, we're really doing this level setting of what are we talking about? What do we mean by community wealth building? So we're going to spend a good chunk of time hearing from Sarah, and I'll introduce her in a second and you'll understand why we're zooming her in. But then we also have local experts here with us. And for this series, we're always going to try and bring that blend of national or international expertise with who we have locally who's making a difference. So without further ado, I'm really so thrilled. This is such a pro panel. I'll introduce Sarah first, and then I'll introduce our gentleman here. So Sarah is joining us from Scotland. She is the Strategic Development Manager at Community Enterprise, and she brings over 20 plus years of experience specifically in supporting and championing social enterprise in Scotland. And we really wanted to have her here because she also co-wrote the Community Wealth Building Toolkit for Arts and Culture and Creative Industry. So she has really focused in on how this model or this framework can serve arts and culture specifically. And so she's going to share that wisdom with us and maybe give us some things to wrestle with here in our local context. So thank you, Sarah, for being with us. And we'll come back to you in a minute. But then we also have Henry Akanko, who's the Director of Community Initiatives at United Way, and he leads strategic efforts to reduce poverty across the region. And in his role in fostering collaboration with key stakeholders, he's also spearheading major initiatives such as the Higher Immigrants Ottawa initiative. And part of the reason why we wanted to have you join today, he's also spearheading the adoption of community wealth building as a framework for poverty reduction from his role at United Way. And then finally, but certainly not least, George Brown, who is a lawyer, urbanist. You have so many hats and so many skill sets. He's the principal at Integral North and president and CEO of Mooney's Bay Ventures. But you also spent 9 years as president of the Ottawa Community Loan Fund, as well as 9 years as a city and regional councillor. Interestingly, you've been affiliated with so many familiar community organizations. So this might ring a bell for many of you: Ottawa Riverkeeper, Ottawa Community Benefits Network, Ottawa Acorn. And then you're also teaching the community wealth building model at the law school at Ottawa U. So with that, I'm going to no, we're not going to Q&A yet. No. So I'm going to stop sharing. And we'll pass things off to you, Sarah.
Hello, everybody. Yay! You hear me okay? Yeah.
We do, yes.
Excellent. It's lovely to meet you all, even if it is so very far away. I'm going to share my screen with you. So thank you so much for inviting me along. I wish I was there with you in the snow, to be honest. But sadly I'm not. I'm in Scotland, which is actually sunny today for once, which is quite incredible. So I'm obviously speaking to you from Scotland, where I work for Community Enterprise. But before I start, actually, I don't think I've got a particularly strong accent. But if you don't understand me or I use a word or anything, will you please just interrupt me or stop me, because I don't mind at all. But I just wanted to give you a wee bit of background about Community Enterprise. So we're a social enterprise, a charity with a trading arm, and all our profits go into our charity. And through that, we're able to provide free support to the sector and get involved in interesting pieces of work that are positive impact on the sector. So work like the Community Wealth Building Toolkit. And the majority of our work is through our consultancy. We provide specialist support to communities and social enterprises. So That might mean business planning or community consultations or buying an asset, all sorts of things like that. And we also provide free support as well to the sector through two different programmes. Just Enterprise, which is for the enterprising third sector, and Accelerate, which is for pre-enterprising organisations and communities. Both Just Enterprise and Accelerate are funded by the Scottish Government through the Social Enterprise Strategy and Action Plan. In partnership with some other national support organisations, we also run the Crisis and Resilience Programme. So this is something we pulled together in response to the number of struggling organisations. We had a lot of organisations suddenly closing down. The idea is you press the crisis button on the map of support and we fly into action, or Victoria does. We pull in support from across the partnership and we help navigate the problem. And where we can't help solve the issue, then what we try to do is make sure that that organisation has a positive ending. Breeze Digital is a programme we set up as well. That was created in response to the number of requests we were getting for digital support. It's a great service, well used, and provides support for a range of things from digital strategies, choosing and implementing programmes and systems, and to using AI ethically. Don't ask me too many questions about the digital stuff. This is the map of support that we created. So the map of support is a tool to help social entrepreneurs in Scotland navigate the support landscape, because it's quite complex, as you can see. It originally started as this lovely tube map, but we've now moved it online. So we actually have a database, and we're in the midst of creating a back end for advisors. We also have Bold Studio, and so Bold Studio, they were the guys who designed the toolkit, and they're our graphic design agency. They provide branding for the sector that's affordable, and they've been getting involved with more and more campaigns too. So a highlight has to be putting politicians in a pig cage in Parliament. No photos of that, sadly. But this campaign here with the dog racing actually is in the news today because they're putting through legislation to ban dog racing. So that's quite exciting that that's gone really well for them. So I just kind of wanted to give you that run through because I think it puts this toolkit maybe into context a wee bit. We're obviously an organisation that's working every day with grassroots organisations. We're speaking to communities constantly, and we've got this great working relationship with a variety of partners across Scotland, both national and local partners. And a couple of years ago, I was having coffee and a catch up with a colleague from Creative Scotland, Ashley, who I think, Cassandra, you maybe spoke to originally. And we were talking about the upcoming Community Wealth Building Bill and its implications. And as ever, and I'm sure this is exactly the same with you guys, culture and creative industries weren't at the table in the conversation about community wealth building. But we were kind of talking about the landscape, and we were talking about the organisations that we knew up and down the country that were already delivering. And so we decided to try and bring culture and the arts into the conversation, at least kickstart that piece of work. Firstly, through some groundwork and research, and then through the toolkit. And so that's kind of where it all began. And I think I'll move on now to actually what community wealth building is and what it means for the sector. So maybe you've obviously got a community wealth building expert in the room, which is really handy. But I think the first thing that we have to point out, and maybe as your conversations go, you might have to keep reminding yourself of this, is that community wealth building is an economic model. So when you're on the ground doing the work, it can really be very easy to forget that this is about economy, because what you're doing is about people in place. And while the aims of community wealth building are also about people in place, you kind of have to remember the economist in the room. And I should also point out at this point that I am not an economist. But this is a shift away from trickle-down economics that so many of us have lived under. And it aims to keep wealth at a local level, giving people more power. As I said, I'm not an economist, so I'm not going to attempt to give you the full history of community wealth building. But what I have done is I've included some links in the speaker's notes section of the slides. So I think that you'll be shared the slides afterwards. You can have a look at those. And there's obviously links in the toolkit as well. But I can give you an idea of the journey that we've had in Scotland. And I'm just going to give a shout out to somebody. There's a man called Neil McEnroy. I don't know if you've come across Neil at all. He very kindly wrote our foreword, and he's been at the forefront of this movement for many years. And I know that he's been talking to some of your colleagues in Canada, and I highly recommend following him on LinkedIn and connecting with him because his knowledge and his learning is just fantastic. And he's certainly somebody that I constantly refer to and go back to. So, nearly 10 years ago, a Scottish contingent visited Preston, which is in the north of England, to hear about the community wealth building pilot that was running. And from that visit, the Scottish Government took an interest in what is now known as the Preston model. So, from that came investment into 6 pilot areas. North Ayrshire has become the most well known out of those. And from that came the Community Wealth Building Bill, which was introduced in March last year and passed last month. So it now goes for royal assent and then it becomes part of Scots law. To be entirely honest, I don't know how long it takes the King to sign it. Who knows? But we're at a really funny stage because we have an election in May, which means that Purdas starts, I think it's next week. So we'll have a new government taking this forward. It might be the same colour of government, who knows? But I think that regardless, we'll have a different cabinet. So it'll be a new government that's kind of taken the work forward. This process has obviously had government backing in Scotland at a national level, but alongside the requirement for ministers to prepare and publish a statement about community wealth building, the new bill puts the onus on local authorities to work with anchor organisations and build action plans and implement them. And there are timescales within the bill for the development and reassessment of these. There are public bodies named within the bill that you will see, and they have to have due regard for community wealth building. So it doesn't feel like this is just a tick box exercise. It really does feel like this is going to have an impact. And of course, the bill isn't perfect, and there are things missing in it that I think a few of us would have hoped to see. But it really does feel like the first step in changing the way the public sector operates. And I was at an event, so it was an EDAS event. In fact, Neil McEnroy was chairing, and a civil servant said prior to the bill, there was lots of excitement, but no structure. And he's right. This gives us structure to ensure change happens. If you go look at the bill, you'll notice that there's a shift in language. They couldn't use the pillars exactly, so they had to use proxy language for the lawmakers, I guess. And they use the word must a lot within it. So they must set out indicators, they must set targets. They're also required to consult, and it'll be really interesting as we go forward to see how far consultation goes and who ends up at the table. So the pillars themselves, I know that you've got your further sessions to explore the pillars, but I thought it might be useful to just have a wee quick overview. So working across 5 pillars, community wealth building aims to build a stronger, fairer local economy centred on the needs of communities. So we'll maybe just take a wee run through each of them. So inclusive ownership supports the development of inclusive and democratic business models. Is that something that you guys have been talking about? Do you talk about IDBMs, as we call them in Scotland? Yeah? No?
No, we talk about social enterprise and co-ops.
Okay.
That's as close as we get to inclusive ownership structures.
Okay. So in Scotland, we were always very clear about social enterprise. 100% of the organisation was asset locked. You know, no money was going into the hands of shareholders. We were always very clear on that. England took a different route towards social enterprise, up to 50% of profits could be could go out to shareholders. The rest had to be reinvested, and they just had a slightly different approach. And I suppose that the lines have gradually become a wee bit more blurred. And we're talking about cooperatives, but we're talking about the whole tranche of cooperatives here. So Inclusive democratic business models is kind of the term that's starting to be used, and there is a paper about it that's quite interesting for anybody who wants to go look at it. There is a link in the toolkit to it. But anyway, so back to inclusive ownership. So we're talking about IDBMs, as we call them, inclusive democratic business models. And the idea is that this gives communities greater control and strengthens economic democracy, leading to better decision making, stronger sense of shared responsibility. And of course, what we're meaning by the IDBMs is approaches where ownership and decisions aren't held by a few at the top, but shared across people and communities who actually rely on them. So the finance pillar focuses on making sure money stays local. So by backing local banks, credit unions, community investment funds, pension funds, we give local organisations the funding they need to grow. So that, of course, means more jobs, better services, stronger economy. And ultimately, it's about building a financial system that works for everyone and not just a few. The workforce pillar of community wealth building focuses on fair work and creating good local job opportunities. Because employment law is reserved, so that means that UK government retain control over this. It's not a devolved area. The way they've handled this within the bill is that where Scotland, the Scottish government, are encouraging anchor organisations to lead by example by paying the real living wage, giving employees a voice, building inclusive workplaces. They're also encouraged to recruit locally, support people who face barriers to work, invest in skills, progression, well-being. All of this helps create a fairer, more sustainable local economy where people have real opportunities to grow. The spending pillar is about using local procurement to benefit the community. So it encourages anchor organisations to spend more with local, small, medium enterprises, third sector groups, supported businesses, all of that helping money stay in the local economy. So that means that they need to get to know their local suppliers, support the development of local supply chains that create jobs and support the community. And partnership working is also key. So smaller organisations can join forces through consortia or by subcontract to bigger contracts that deliver social impact. The land and property pillar recognises the important role that land and buildings play in our communities. So by managing these assets in a fair and socially responsible way, we can use them more effectively for community benefit, creating social, environmental and economic value. So this pillar connects strongly with previous legislation that we have through our land reform, which promotes fairer, more diverse land ownership. Key actions include tackling vacant and derelict sites, supporting community ownership and management, prioritising environmental sustainability and net zero projects, and increasing transparency so communities are genuinely involved in decisions about local land and buildings. So, as I mentioned earlier, Ashley and I, Ashley from Creative Scotland, we were sitting drinking coffee when we came up with this whole idea. We were sitting in the sunshine in Royal Exchange Square in Glasgow, right next to the Gallery of Modern Art, or GOMA as it's known. And we were musing on how connected culture and arts in Scotland are to the community wealth building agenda, but without that voice. And we talked about the organisations we knew that had become local anchors, place for people to gather during COVID, and a lifeline for many. Something that we've done during the within the toolkit is we've kind of separated out what they call anchor organisations and what we call anchor organisations, because that's something that the third sector has been using for many, many years. So within the toolkit, we've separated them. So we've got the institutional anchor organisations and the community anchor organisations. But within the bill itself, they mean the institutional. It can be a bit difficult because you guys will know that the anchor organisations that are actually in your communities are not part of the public sector generally. Some of them might be, but a lot of them are community led. So we were talking about artists being paid fairly for the work. That's a common subject for us. And we talked about solutions to this, but not just about ensuring that we pay well, but supporting structures that provide artists with security. We talked about cultural hubs, about interesting partnerships and impact of the sector. Something else we began to realise was that while creative and cultural social enterprises have engaged in national conversation that might have an understanding of community wealth building, the majority of sole traders or small community-led organisations either hadn't heard of it at all or thought it was just more buzzwords. So the conversation moved from us kind of chewing the cud, making a plan to help creative communities, to a piece of research and a toolkit aimed at community level, not anchor organisation level. So everything else that has come out so far had been very much aimed at anchor organisations, because that's who the bill is aimed at. And we ran a survey and we started speaking to people working culture in Scotland, because we wanted to make sure we had it right, basically. So I made this outcome star one evening and took it to a workshop the following day. And I created it so I could get a better understanding of where the organisations that I was going to speak into that day, where they were, what they were already doing, and what their plans were, and how they were connected to community wealth building. And I just wanted to get a clearer picture myself. So after spending some time going through the pillars, I asked the creatives in the room to take some time to think about their organisations, how they're run, and the work that they do. The questions down that side are they're designed as a guide to help link back to the pillars. So I then asked them to think about in relation to community wealth building. So they're thinking about their own organisation and then thinking about it in relation to these pillars. So first, internally, what's your setup? How do you operate? And then externally, how do you behave within your community? And then I asked them to take some time and to think 5 years into the future and do it again. So the session began quietly, as you can imagine, as everybody kind of started to think about through the questions and relate them to their own work. And then it became suddenly really interactive, because these creatives knew each other really, really well. They're all part of the same creative community. They supported each other over the years, and they're involved in each other's projects, so and plans for the future as well. So they started to have conversations about each other's organisations and actually what the priorities were. And it proved to be such a useful tool for getting people thinking about their work in terms of community wealth building that we chose to include it in the toolkit. And I saw two really interesting things that do. The first was the organisations with a clear strategy knew where their focus was, and we saw clear growth in some areas and none in others. Whereas the organisations that weren't planning for the future, they were just, ad hoc, going for it. Their wee wiggly lines grew across all areas that just really isn't feasible. So that was interesting in itself. The other thing was the sheer amount of work going on. It was a phenomenal amount. And I couldn't even begin to put all the activity that creatives do onto one slide. But we've got some great examples in the toolkit from Findhorn Bay Arts, from North Edinburgh Arts, and from Grampian Hospital Arts Trust. So you can have a wee look through them. But in the room that day, in that particular workshop, we had an organisation that works across mental health services, providing socially prescribed activity as part of a preventative spend agenda. Totally matches up to community wealth building. There was a creative network that provides peer support and startup advice to creatives, as well as training and everything else that a network brings. There was an event organiser that works with local artists and puts fair pay at the heart of the organisation, whilst bringing in a phenomenal number of visitors to the local area. So obviously visitor spend. And we had an organisation that brings theatre to rural Scotland as well. So they use local community spaces, ensuring that the spaces are paid, but they also deal with all the licenses and issues that exist with bringing a full cast to an extremely rural location. They've also been doing some really interesting work gathering data on carbon footprint. So what's the difference between multiple cars driving 100 miles to the closest city to see a show and bringing a cast to a community? So and then on top of that, they've been looking at the impact on isolation and loneliness. So there was just a phenomenal amount of stuff just in that room, let alone across the country. So the next piece of work that we had was developing the toolkit, and it wasn't a quick process, as you can imagine. It's quite a chunky document, but we wanted to create something that used plain language that would enable you to move around it and focus on the things that are interesting to you. So it's designed as a choose your own adventure. So Kylie, my colleague, described it as that to bold, and it totally stuck. So yeah, it's a design your own. It's a choose your own adventure. But you can go straight down a rabbit hole if you want, and you can become an expert on any of the pillars. There's lots of links in there. So you can read as much or as little as you like. It provides useful tools and information on things like how to build an advocacy document and a whole section on gathering data, why, what for, how to do it well. And we've been amazed how far it's gone, and the fact that it's made it all the way over to you guys is just very exciting for us. So I genuinely hope it's useful for you. This is a picture of my lovely colleague Kylie, who helped write the toolkit. While finishing her PhD, in fact, she's now Dr. Kylie. I think we're supposed to call her Dr. Fagan, but I like Dr. Kylie. So in finishing, I was asked to give you some recommendations. And that's a bit difficult because I think we're in very different positions from a policy point of view. We have had a government who've led much of this work, and although the bill could have gone further, at least we have a bill. But I've also had the joy of attending the Social Enterprise World Forum on many occasions, and something that always strikes me is the number of countries who've built a strong sector and a movement with absolutely no government support. And in Scotland, we have been lucky. We've got a very positive policy landscape for many, many years. But I think because of that, we have an awful lot to learn from others across the globe who haven't had that support. So my recommendations are work together, connect and develop partnerships, find like-minded individuals and organisations, kind of what you're doing today, I guess. But are there people working in anchor institutions that might align themselves with you and your vision as well? Make friends. Build that advocacy document for your creative community. Collect the right data that will speak to the decision makers so you can push for resources and influence wherever you can. Work with your networks to build consortiums to strengthen local supply chains. Create a directory. Start to build case studies of best practice. Support the inclusive and democratic business models, whether that's new and emerging or mature organisations. Explore how you can actually support one another, use each other's spaces, use each other's services. Maybe we could come and deliver Accelerate in Ottawa. That'd be cool. Then I could come visit. Build your story of what community wealth building looks like in Ottawa and tell it. Be positive. Talk about the successes. Use your creative skills. Tap into your cultural heritage. And most importantly for me, keep in touch. I want to tell your story too. I would really love to be able to tell our politicians and our communities about what you're doing and how powerful it is. And as I said, we've still got so much to learn as well. So if you come to Scotland, reach out, because I'd love to grab a coffee and hear your story, hear how things are progressing. I've just been to an event this morning in Stirling, and it was around heritage, and had a conversation around tourism and heritage and the links that are happening. Same thing across with Canada, because so many of the issues that we've got are just the same, and lots of learning to be done. So maybe there's an opportunity for us to visit each other. And that brings me back to my Peely Wally yellow slide. But of course, I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm happy for you to share the slides. As I said, I popped some links in there, and happy for you to share my contact details as well. And I'll stop sharing the screen so I can see you all properly again. There we go.
Thank you both for joining us in person, giving us the sort of warmth of engagement that provides. And I'd love to start with both of you, just a couple of minutes. We'll start with you, Henry, and then over to you, George, to hear about the work that you're doing with community wealth building in your particular context.
Thanks very much, Leah and Cassandra, for inviting us to be part of this conversation. For us at United Way East Ontario, community wealth building is a very important strategy for us in the work that we do around lifting people out of poverty. The world in which we live and which our community is not isolated from is confronted by multiple challenges. And each one of them focuses on different issues, different communities. But the groups that we often are most concerned about and work towards supporting are those that fall within the marginalized groups. So those that are significantly impacted by poverty. And so when you look at the community wealth building framework, it provides a very strategic approach by centering the person at the heart of local economic development activity. And if you look at the 5 pillars that Sarah just walked us through, you see that even though they seem, in the way they are presented, it seem like they are isolated on their own. But when you begin to look at how they work, there's linkages between these pillars. And so for us, community wealth building provides us with that framing to be able to address multi-hydro-headed strategies or challenges with this approach. So we invest in supporting social enterprises that provides employment and training opportunities to marginalized communities, including women fleeing violence, at-risk youth, to get skills to be able to be contributing members of society. We also are working to bring together the ecosystem. Recognize there's a lot of work going on, but at this point it's all very fragmented, and we see the value of that synergy when we all work together to be able to scale some of the initiatives that are ongoing in our city. So these are just a few examples of the ways we are working in this space, and why community wealth building for us is very important around lifting people out of poverty, and we'll go deeper as the conversation evolves.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, just to follow up and United Way and Henry in particular was very active in the city's poverty alleviation, the development of the city's poverty alleviation strategy, and community wealth building was actually endorsed as one of the recommendations for that. So, I mean, I come to this, for a long time ago, something caught my eye. It was known then as community economic development, which I believe now community wealth building is another name for it. But it's basically about economic development among people that have been left out of the system. So it developed in the United States, in African American inner cities, where basically no banks would loan for housing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Community development corporations were established. And anyways, community economic development has been evolving in this country for last 30 years or so. And that's something that I just found it spoke to myself. To me, I come at it from many different reasons. To me, it's about democracy, that democracy is just not about voting, that if you don't have economic power in your community, you don't have power. And community economic development was about providing tools to communities that normally are left out of the system. Fast forward, and so I got into politics to promote that. I did a master's in it. And over the years, we've been involved. Ottawa's a small town. So, there are organizations that have, as Henry referenced, that have been started that are working on pieces of the pillars, which we can talk about in more detail. The Center for Social Enterprise Development, the Ottawa Community Loan Fund, which does microcredit loans. Now the Ottawa Community Land Trust, which is, raising money through local finance, one of the pillars, to take housing off the market to keep it affordable forever. And so all these things are happening. But what's missing, in my view, is we don't have that overarching, first of all, we don't have progressive politicians like they do in Scotland that, have developed it. I think first in the world, I believe, national community wealth building strategy. So that's brilliant. But here, we've got some great organizations doing great work, but basically still in the silos. And this, what's missing is the opportunity to really connect all the dots. And that's why we were thrilled when Arts Ottawa stepped up and said, yeah, we see ourselves here. We should be at the table. Absolutely should be at the table. I'll stop talking in a second, but one of the one of the key reasons, so, everyone knows about gentrification, right? We know what gentrification is. And we know that poverty is place-based. And, I'm going to blame all you artists. You guys drive gentrification because the artists come into a community where the space is affordable and they make it funky and they make it vibrant and alive. And then Starbucks comes in. Now, I do have a Starbucks here, okay? But Starbucks comes in and you know what happens. And then the rents go up, the condos come in and the artists are booted out and the low-income people who had affordable housing, they're gone and the neighborhood gentrifies. And if you know Ottawa, Westboro, West Wellington, Hintonburg, you could see it coming down the street. Community wealth building has the tools, if we can mobilize, to prevent that, or to be part of it. Not part of gentrification, but part of buying up housing while it's still affordable and taking it off the market. Commercial space for artists, providing space for that. It's intentional. So I'll stop there. I'm a bit passionate about it.
I love it.
But we need, as Henry, and Henry is so focused and has done a great job, and I'm on the board of United Way, and I'm, on his ass constantly about this. We need to be more intentional and we need to be strategic, and we can talk about how we can do that.
Yeah. So my next question, because all three of you have touched on this, and Sarah, I'm thinking about your star diagram.
Yeah.
And then, what you were saying about the value of seeing the pillars as distinct, but then recognizing them as intersecting in this larger framework. And then you sort of said a similar thing, Henry, in terms of the real piece of work is the coordination. When we had our conversation, you told this great story of going to a United Way sort of centralized group conversation and seeing that certain chapters were bringing very clear, concise, coordinated asks or demands, and that Ottawa was showing up with just like everything on the buffet table and sort of a fragmented set of demands. Can you tell us, do you remember that story that you were telling me, and the value of coordinating around a framework to sort of synthesize and distill?
Yeah, it was basically just highlighting the fact that when you work in a fragmented environment and you're all trying to get the attention of
Funders.
The larger ecosystem to support the work, it can be like, if I would use the metaphor of a shipwreck where people are drowning and everybody's got their hands up because there's a helicopter flying to try to rescue people and everybody's waving their hands up. Now, the question is, who did they pull out first? Now think about, during a shipwreck, you have those small life-saving inflatable boats that they usually have that somebody's, a team is able to quickly inflate them and guide people to, in an orderly way, get in and everybody gets rescued. It's a very similar approach to coordination. When we work in fragmented ways, we all want the attention of politicians to bring about policy changes. We want to see anchor institutions adopt social procurement policies, have fair wage policies, adopt community benefits agreements. So you can think about everybody in this room going and knocking on the same doors, wanting to ask for the same thing. I'm asking for this from unemployment. You're asking it from arts. George is asking from labor. That's a lot of time asking for similar, related, but slightly nuanced issues. How about if we all got together and were able to iron out, these are three key priorities that inures to our community under the framework of community wealth building, and we present that to a policymaker, to an elected official. Each time any one of us has an audience with them, we are articulating those three key things. It makes it easier for them to take us serious because they're hearing it from all quarters. We are very clear in our message because we are coordinated. We can make progress more quickly. So this is one of the reasons why United Way is supporting this work by trying to help coordinate those. So we can be smart in how we articulate the challenges that we face. we can articulate the solutions, we can offer to work with those who are able to help move these forward. So this provides a much cleaner opportunity for us to be able to work together, as well as, there's strength in numbers when you work together than when each person is on their own.
I love this analogy. I want to come to you, Sarah, because I want to talk about the rafts. This is such a great analogy. I want to talk about the rafts within arts and culture. And then George, come to you and talk about the rafts across sectors or across industries. So when you first presented that star structure and you asked people to identify themselves within it, what happened when they started to see who else was in that star with them? What did the raft look like? Did you hear Henry's analogy of the Okay.
Yeah. So I think that to begin with, the process was really quite personal for them. So they take that moment to really examine who they are as an organisation. But everyone, I mean, we were in a room that was a really close creative community anyway. But every single one of them were linked in some way. So they were already delivering projects together. So the organisation that was leading on social prescribing wasn't doing it alone. The organisation that is running that big national event isn't doing it alone. In fact, I think everybody in that room was delivering for that event. They're already working across the board together in different ways and have relationships. And I think that, you're never alone. And when you've got to tackle issues locally, whether it's unemployment or housing or whatever it is, if you've got an organisation that has a social conscience that is built around that, then the people that are there working there, that are volunteers, that are using the service, those issues are already at the heart. So everybody's in the same place, coming from the same place, and I think that that's probably what's key. And it's just one issue I would say maybe from past experience of building consortiums is that sometimes you have a different set of values for your reason for being there, and that can be difficult to align sometimes. You might have one group that are very focused on supporting homelessness and another group that are very focused on the environment, and their values might not quite align. And so that can be a little bit of an issue, and you kind of have to work through some of that stuff. But yeah, I think the thing that I love about the sector is that we're all working together and happy to share. It's not like the private sector where people keep things secret. We want to make the world a better place. So here, use my tools, let's work together, let's apply for things together. I think that's probably key.
Once people saw each other together, was there a specific sort of organizing step to activate the community wealth building arm or branch of work together, or it just sort of organically emerged through existing partnerships?
For that particular group. So I think they're still in that process. I don't think they've conquered that yet. They're still in that process. Right at that moment, and I know Ashley is here in the room, but right at that moment when we were doing that work, they were in the midst of funding applications for the big funding that's for 3 years. And so this work was never going to be a priority at that moment in time. So it's something that they have recently been back in touch about, and they're still working on. And of course, we were waiting on a bill. We weren't quite sure what was going to be in that and what it was going to look like. So that work is still ongoing. I honestly can't say what the impact of that has been yet, because it's still there, it's still happening, and it's quietly. And Ashley's put her camera on so you can see her now and ask
Yeah,
her.
hi Ashley. Ashley's from Creative Scotland.
If you at any point coffee with.
Yes, right. If you at any point want to jump in, Ashley, just raise your hand and we'll bring you into the conversation. It's great to have you here. I'll just go over to you now, George. So thinking about, presumably if we get ourselves coordinated with the rafts that we have identified and the people or leaders who want to participate in that coordination effort, then how do we bridge that onto the existing rafts or the forming rafts of other sectors around?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I mean, First of all, I just want to clarify one, that we've been throwing the term anchor institutions around, and I know Sarah made reference to, I mean, when we talk about anchor institutions here in Canada, for the most part, we're talking about major public institutions. So we're talking about, look, at the city of Ottawa is spending billions on a light rail contracts. The Ottawa Hospital.
Shifts uncomfortably.
The Ottawa Hospital. So anchor institutions are basically institutions that are here that aren't going anywhere. They're not like it's a private sector company that has lost its business and is shutting down. So, and they spend billions of dollars on a lot of the stuff that, you know, they spend money on catering, they spend money on supplies, they spend money on arts, believe it or not, probably not enough. So hospitals, universities, colleges, you know, that is what, you know, those are anchor institutions in this community, city government, boards of education, et cetera. So I think that's important, because we basically have said to drive the community wealth building agenda here, you know, we've got to have an anchor institution strategy. We've got to get these institutions. We have to get the business community. We have to get the arts community, the social service community, you know, around the table together. So my answer to this is, I'm hoping we're heading towards, Henry referenced collaborating, but convening community wealth building, like a collective impact. United Way has been a real leader in promoting collective impact, you know, approaches, which is basically, we can't solve our wicked problems in our community, whether they're poverty or you name it, by being in silos. We have to be around the table working together. And I'm hoping that's where we're headed with community wealth building. And I'm hoping that then now we've got the Arts Ottawa will be at the table, you know, with eventually the Board of Trade, with United Way, with the City of Ottawa, with major anchor institutions, so that we can work on the things that need to be done, like procurement policies, you know, et cetera, that serve, not to be parochial, but serve the art, can serve the artist community, et cetera. So that's what I'm hoping we're working towards.
Yeah. Henry, do you want to tell the group a bit about the convening series that you're putting together and how that's taking shape?
Yeah, so we've been working, and George has been very instrumental about this as well in bringing together the ecosystem. I should also mention that United Way East Ontario has a very large geographical footprint. So our operations start from the east, Prescott Russell, you know, through Ottawa, Lanark, all the way to Renfrew County. So it's a very large geographical area. At the same time, Ottawa is the largest community within these four communities that we work in. And so the critical mass of ecosystem actors are here in Ottawa. But we always have to be reminded that we have three other communities that we need to bring into the conversation, and the opportunities for cross-learning, because the other three, and even Ottawa has a large rural catchment area, which we often forget about. And so we are making progress, but progress is slow because there's so many groups that you want to have a conversation with. The good news is enthusiasm is very high. People see the value in it. As Sarah talked about earlier on, it's important for us to have clear language that we understand each other, because there's times when we all use the same terminologies, but everybody interprets them differently. So we are in the same room thinking we're having one conversation, but no, we're having multiple conversations because of that. So we had to go through those processes of clarifying definitions, setting up some principles to guide the work that we are doing. And where we are at this point is trying to put together a report, but then some of the recommendations which I can highlight is looking at beginning to focus on each of the pillar areas. And the pillars that we adapted is very much similar to what Sarah highlighted. The pillar titles might have some slight changes in the way they all come from the Democratic Collaborators pillars. And so we are working along those, is now trying to map out some of the key actors within each pillar and beginning to have much deeper engagement at the pillar level to look at what are the issues, how we can work around those. Everybody has capacity issues because most of these initiatives are small. So they have their own capacity. Everybody sees opportunities for scaling up, which we want to see happen because that is how we can make a dent on poverty for us being in this. And of course, everybody wants to make sure that the spending dollars by anchor institution, there's opportunity for that inclusive economic participation across board. So that's very key. And some policy frameworks need to be adopted by some of these organizations or support the implementation of some of those. The city has a social procurement policy, but its implementation is not where we'd want to see it. There aren't that many social enterprises or small businesses that are able to participate. Some of them don't even know that this exists, don't understand the processes. Anybody who has dealt with government understand the bureaucracy in filling forms and all of those processes. So that's a work in progress to do that. So it's something that we are working towards. We are excited that Arts Ottawa is taking this on, and we are hoping that you will be part of the work that we are doing as well.
I have one more question and then I'll hand it over to you. So take the minute to think about it. And for those online as well, if we have some questions, pop them into the Q&A or into the chat. This is a bit of a overly reductionist question, but just out of curiosity, you both mentioned social procurement. If you were to prioritize the activation of, say, the lowest hanging fruit as far as the pillars go, which one would you tackle first?
That's a great question.
So if you want to take a second to think about it, and
I don't
Sarah,
need
to
to
you
think.
too. You don't need to think. Okay, go, Josh.
Well, so I think it's procurement personally, because procurement policies. So the city has got a social procurement, and we say social procurement policy, and that include artwork. I mean, I don't know, I'm not involved, I have no, I believe there's policies at the city about art in public space. Like, I don't know whether, you guys know probably more than, you do know more than me, but when it comes to arts. But procurement policies are important. So my understanding was there used to be an art in public places policy, so that when there was redevelopment, there was money that was set aside for public art. Like these things don't happen by accident. You have to have policies that do that. So to me, procurement drives demand. We have social enterprises, as Henry says, there's all sorts of social enterprises out there. But if there's no recognition that, you know what, City of Ottawa, you know, you're spending $100,000, and I'm just making that up, but, you know, on catering, that 10%, because by the way, this movement is talking about those sort of numbers. If 10% of your catering budget was purchased, so not new money, existing money that you're spending, 10% was purchased from social enterprises that employ people with disabilities, people with barriers to employment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You would help build an inclusive, equitable economy. So that's what we're talking about. You know, it's a requirement to just do little things like that, but to be intentional and have policies that do that. So procurement for me, so Lansdowne Park, we all have our opinions on Lansdowne Park, you know, but because of the efforts of, I imagine, the Ottawa Community Benefits Network, you know, and lobbying councillors, Lansdowne Park is going to have community benefits framework built in. Now, Henry probably knows a lot more about that than I do, but you know, where there'll probably be space made for social enterprises. I would be arguing that there should be, you know, specific arts buys, you know, commitment to these are the things, if we're at the table, we can be part of, you know, it used to be Lansdowne Park, trust us, right? We're going to invest this money and it's going to trickle down to everybody. Well, we now know that with the sponges at the top, it just doesn't work, nothing trickles down. So we have to be intentional. So procurement, sorry for my rant, I'm a bit passionate, but.
I knew that was your answer and I
Yeah,
wanted to hear it.
I
so
really
thank
think
you.
that's what's gonna drive a lot of this agenda.
How about you, Sarah? What would you recommend we start with as a pillar? If
Well,
you
Sorry.
no, go ahead.
So, well, I think the procurement one is really interesting. So from our experience, procurement for the anchor organisations is the low-hanging fruit. That's the easy one, the easy hitter.
Yes.
My frustration with that is, well, first of all, it's procurement they should have been doing for the last 20 years.
Yes.
But also, they're maybe not quite getting it right. They're not. One of the things that's happening is they're creating these wish lists. So what they do is they're still putting out those contracts to the big guys, but then they insert into that a community benefit clause, which just means they have to deliver something on a wish list. Well, that's not economic benefit at all. That's something else entirely. So that's one of my major frustrations. The other one is that when you're talking procurement and you talk about community benefit clauses and you talk about social impact to the anchor organisations, they are still thinking about recycling and local workforces. They don't really think beyond that. And there's a lack of imagination, which I think is where a piece of work has to be done to advocate for creatives to say, actually, we can deliver an awful lot more. So that's kind of an issue. I think that one that in Scotland has been really, really strong and continues to be strong is the land and property. Now, we have had quite a lot of land reform, and there's a lot more going on. We had the Community Empowerment Act of 2015, which has done a lot for enabling communities to take hold of assets and take control of assets. We've got an awful lot more to do. I thought it was really interesting that last week I saw that one of the local authorities was shouting about how much money they've managed to bring in, selling off a load of spaces that they don't want to use. I thought, well, that's handy, isn't it? Right before the bill comes in and they have to actually think about who they sell it to. And it was really interesting. National press celebrating, local press, everybody getting really upset, saying, where was the consultation? So I think that in Scotland, the land issue is quite a big one. And I don't know, Ashley, if you've had any involvement in Dundee and the work that they're doing in Dundee at all, but they're really interested in connecting with the private sector as well and looking at how space is used, making sure that it's space for creatives to actually have messy space for making and things like that. So I think that that's quite an exciting one for the creative industries in general. But I agree, when it comes to the anchor organisations, procurement feels for them, I think, like it's an easy one to hit.
I don't mean to skip you on this one, but I realized I've crunched the time. Although I do set my watch a couple minutes ahead, so that I'm never late for things. But I think we've only got a few minutes for Q&A, which is not ideal. I would have loved more time to hear from you, but we'll stay for the workshop and wrestle things out further there. But any questions from the floor? Brody?
I have a question for Sarah. I'm wondering specifically about with the wealth building bill, what the process at the MISO level looks like. So the 3 to 5 year plans for local public authorities. Like the way community wealth building works and how my brain sees it is the idea of asserting planning impulse over capital is very it really is socialist or mixed economy. Like China just has its 5 year plan, but if institutions at that MISO level are doing the 5 year planning, what does that look like in terms of one, taking bottom up democratic input from local organizations to decide on the goals of those planning? And then do they have support the other direction, top down from national level or whatever, to implement policy and regulation to support that, whether, carrot type make co-ops easier, employment ownership trust is big in Canada right now, or stick of forcing capital to invest in certain socially productive, democratically decided areas.
So it's really interesting. So I was at an event earlier this week, in fact, and some of this was up for discussion. So what happens is it goes for royal assent and then it becomes part of Scots law, and then the ministers have to write a statement to go with it. And then from that, local authorities start to work on their own action plans. Now, like anywhere else, it'll be a bit of a postcode lottery. It'll depend who's in power within that local authority to a certain extent, and how bought in they are to this bill. But what we would hope to see, and one of the things that came out really strongly at the session that I was at with EDAS, was that everybody hopes that community is at that table. So it says in the bill that they must consult, but it doesn't tell them how. But there will be guidance to go with this. So nothing is really quite clear yet. It's not, it's still at the beginning. But as far as we're concerned, there's supposed to be that consultation. There's supposed to be community at the table, and involved in the development of those plans. And then there is a responsibility to report back on those plans, and there'll be a responsibility for government to review as well in 5 years' time. So there's kind of all this impetus coming on. It's quite difficult. Everybody's feeling really, really positive at the minute. So you don't really want to be the person going, well, aye, but what if they don't? Like, you kind of want to be on the bandwagon saying we can really make a change. So I think at the moment where we are is that the way that Scotland operates, we do have a relationship. We're really small. The community has a relationship. It's really easy to speak to all of our ministers. I mean, our First Minister, for example, was on the phone to my Chief Exec the other week asking him a question. It's really, we're dead wee. So we have relationships across the board that is possible to influence. And if things don't go in the right direction, don't you worry, the sector will be jumping up and down and causing a right stushy and causing a problem. But I think that as we go forward, we just have to influence where we can and make sure that we have the right people at the table. That goes for community. But then we have the same question of the arts. And I see that Ashley's got her hand up. And that comes back to the conversation we had right at the very beginning, making sure that the arts is actually represented, that culture is represented as well as community, because you guys are not always represented. I'm sure that you have the same problem of just not getting a seat at the table. And culture's generally the first to be cut, and funding wise. I don't know if you want to bring Ashley in, because I feel that she can maybe help out with one.
Go ahead, Ashley.
Sure. Just to partly to even contextualize that a tiny bit more. So yeah, we're small, 32 local authorities, 5 million-ish people, and so each one of the community wealth building bill is operating in those across those 32 local authorities. But then the picture that I see it in the context of at a national level is framing of a well-being economy, and Scotland has kind of worked hard to set out its stall around this idea of a well-being economy, and the idea that the kinds of policy impacts that we're looking for, we will hopefully be able to talk about them in wider terms beyond simply economic development. So when we think about community wealth building, it's an economic development policy. Like, make no mistake, it's about economic development, but it's economic development in a particular kind of way, which hopefully will have positive social impacts. And the reason that we wanted to work with Sarah on this is because the way that our policies are structured right now, there's no statutory requirement to include arts, culture, creative industries. There are statutory requirements to include other kinds of social sector organizations. And so we are trying to get our guys to get their elbows out and maybe get our elbows out a little bit to just kind of make sure that, like, we see this policy space as a real opportunity to do better in terms of making the case for the impact of the arts, culture, and creative industries, and also for the arts, culture, and creative industries to make different kinds of impacts and also earn more income, ideally. But everyone has to see us there, and we have to see ourselves there. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we're in quite a positive place at the moment. We'll just stay there for a wee bit longer.
Yeah, you haven't yet had to think through enforcement or incentivization, right?
And I think it'll become clearer over the coming weeks. Once we get to the other side of the election, things will start to become a little bit clearer again. But yeah, at the moment, it's kind of a bit of a wait and see.
Let's take one more question if there is one, and I don't know.
For George, if I can.
Yeah, sure.
Having lived in this town and worked in this town for decades, it's always been a multi-jurisdictional town. And for every reason in the world, they just don't want to get along. And I'm just wondering if you care to address the issue.
Yeah. I mean, we always joke about, this is Ottawa. And I mean, we are way behind many municipalities across Canada on a lot of this stuff. Community benefit agreements, Vancouver has got that. Why is that important for the arts community? Because affordable commercial space for artists is something that can be included in community benefit agreements is common, but we don't have a policy on that yet. So it's frustrating. At the same time, the federal government was actually a leader in pushing social procurement. This did not come from Ottawa. It originally came from, not so much Mr. Carney. I don't know what the status is right now, but certainly Liberals over the last 4 or 5 years, it was built into policy statements about certain percentage of procurement. So it's, but if you're not at the table, you got to be at all the tables, and we have to get our act together locally here, and hopefully we'll be able to do that. So. I wish I had more of an answer. This is Ottawa Speed. I love civil servants. My father was a civil servant, but there's a certain mentality in this city that we have to work at. It's too slow for my liking, but that's where we need artists. You guys don't take shit. I mean, it's the artists that basically, in my view, are out front, about creating communities that we want. And that's why we need you at the table.
Sense making.
I just had a random thought. Is it possible that the arts always come, it seems, devalued because it's a form of passive income? Just in the sense of galleries, right? They create so much value in a way that is just not tangibly seen. So the government doesn't really look at it as the artists, like music, right? All of these things seem frivolous, but yet it is passive income. It generates great value in a way that you cannot see it on a daily basis. It's not like a farmer or a tech, but it has great inherent value, not just because throughout time and history, it is art and culture that brings communities and holds communities together. From the time a mother gives birth to a child, the first thing she does is she sings a song, a lullaby. So there is value to community. You take those things away, community falls apart. It's also so inherently important to our mental health and our physical and vital health. So is there another way that we can frame it as the arts community as to this is vital? It's essential. It's essential.
That's a great point. Yeah. And we're not here saying you need to basically, if you can't make an economic argument, you shouldn't exist 100%.
No. But it's just that we've never really, how do we articulate the importance when it is a cultural
that's a very good observation. And I would say that as part of what the conversations with your community is how do you position the arts from being seen as peripheral to economic development, but for people to see that this is an economic development activity. When you look at, as we're speaking, I'm thinking about all the city spaces that I have been at, and the main offices, there's always space where there's art there, Shankerman Center, City Hall, Constellation. They have all that spaces. But I'm sure that is a very different department of the city that provide that spaces for artists to be able to push their artwork there. And the economic development wing of the city has no clue about this.
Yeah.
So this is where some of the work that we're doing is about creating those linkages so that the two talk together, so they see the economic value of that and not just a social value and the beauty that art presents.
And one more thought.
Somebody at the back, sorry.
So we have tourism. Ottawa brings a lot of people to the town. And one of the things that when I go to other countries, I'd like to see the art. I'd like to see the culture. So this is economic development.
Yeah.
If you develop the arts in the city, then you'll also bring in economic development. So I think there is a link to make there, and there's a case to make
Great.
there.
I think, a lot of what we're saying actually put it really well, that this is a well-being economy and we're not just here to like live and work and die. There's lots of things for us to do to contribute to our neighbors, to our families, and to the future of our city. And to build on, George, what you're saying about the artists can do this, I think about something that our artist in residence, Jordan Danger, who was working within the artist in residence and government program, I think she described what artistic intelligence, use a different AI, what it means. And she described, having worked as a municipal worker for a long time herself, that, municipal workers or civil servants or engineers, they think of a sidewalk as where the sidewalk goes in the corner, right? So they're going to follow the path of the road and then walk that sidewalk. But artists take the desired path, right? They're not cutting the corner. They're just taking the path that makes the most sense to get from A to B. And I think this is where our power is as an arts and culture community, what we can bring to economic development, what we can bring to these kinds of frameworks, see the change that we want to see in the place that we live, in the place that we work, the place where we're raising our families and making friendships, but also in the kinds of careers and organizations that we want to build to hold our artists and our community.